because we see that the internet is playing a major role in radicalizing especially our immigrant society, the young male Muslims. They get their messages from Pakistan through the internet. They use themselves the internet. You can follow by the internet exercises in producing explosives and other things. I think internet is playing really a very, very important role, and it's getting more and more important. Therefore, I can only agree with the statement what we have heard before. But nevertheless, it's very hard and difficult to control the internet. I think we have to live with. That's a new tool of globalization. We have to bear this in mind. And we have, again, to live with. I don't see that there is a solution that we could limit the way of communication inside the internet. I think it's really a new challenge we have to live with. Let me mention one other point. You have mentioned the Kashmir-India problem. That's in reality a big problem because Kashmir, of course, is a source of terrorism in Pakistan. And all these groups in tribal areas, they have many of the cases there are links to Kashmir, and we have seen the Mumbai incident. Unfortunately, there is a lack of cooperation between both sides, between India and Pakistan. And as an outsider, you can't really change the situation. But it's really a pity. It's not only a problem in Kashmir between India and Pakistan. You have the same problems, for example, between Morocco and Algeria. There is no real cooperation in fighting terrorism, because I see there are a lot of common interests, even between Pakistan and India. But until now, I don't see any change, and I think you can't change it as an intelligence agency. It's more a question of the bilateral relationship between India and Pakistan, and I have seen some improvements during the last months, during the last year, and I think we hope all together in the international community that things are improving in order to have a better cooperation.
Thank you. Ambassador Patterson, the internet.
The internet. I think we see the internet as perhaps more important than the extreme imam or the madrasa as a radicalizer. I think you put your finger right on it. This is a major source of radicalization which infects populations in Western countries as it does in what we've seen as the traditional source countries of terrorism. It deals with everything. It deals with propaganda, fundraising, operational planning, dispersing technical information, social networking over YouTube and Facebook. It's a major problem. But in liberal Western societies, there is also a fundamental problem of unfettered access to the internet. And we haven't really grappled with that one in respect of terrorism. I think in other areas like child sex, we have made some steps forward. In terrorism, we haven't really. And the issues of disruption by governments or manipulation of jihadist websites by governments is deeply contentious, and there's no consensus, I think, on how we go about it. But the scale of the problem is enormous. I think this is absolutely one of the most central challenges we face. But as yet, we don't have the answers.
Eric, America has perhaps the most important, significant intelligence agency in this field, the NSA, which monitors the internet very effectively and very extensively. Wouldn't one idea of enhancing international cooperation be for the NSA to make the results of these monitoring exercises more available to other states, governments, partners?
I mean, it's certainly something we're thinking about. I'm personally not familiar with the extent of the NSA's monitoring, and I would imagine that to the extent they're sharing information with other similar services with like-minded countries, that it would include their findings from this monitoring exercise. But I think the bigger challenge is actually is not so much the sharing of information that from this monitoring, but I think what Ambassador Patterson was referring to again, which is different countries have very different standards in terms of steps one can take to regulate the internet. And certainly the United States, we're at one extreme, given our First Amendment. And the other part of which makes all this idea of international cooperation in this field so vexing. But the other issue is using the internet as a vehicle for countering the narrative. And I think that is something where cooperation is more likely to bear fruit because of, we're talking about proactively using the internet to improve our messaging and get a different narrative out there than the one that the Al-Qaeda and its affiliates are doing. I don't think enough attention has been paid to that in terms of at the international level. I know some governments are spending a lot of time and energy on that. We certainly are. But I think, again, if we're talking about how international cooperation and where international cooperation is going to evolve in the next 10 years, I think this is one area where you might see more.
Excellent. Richard, the internet.
Yeah, the internet, of course, is vastly important, and as a result, there's been a great deal of work and attention paid to it, and within the UN as well as in other areas in this area of counterterrorism. I agree with Ambassador Patterson that it is a cause of radicalization. People can get very radicalized by watching things on the internet or reading people's speeches and so on. And we still believe that it takes an individual to strike a match and set that afire to bring it to violence. But nonetheless, we have been looking at the internet first of all, in whether it's possible to conceive of some sort of international convention, international regulation to prevent terrorist use of the internet along the lines, for example, of the European Convention on Cybercrime. And our conclusion is that that would be incredibly difficult, not just for First Amendment reasons, but also because of the nature of the internet to have an effective legal system which was properly implemented all over the world is almost unthinkable. But nonetheless, we should be continuing to think about it. Then we also engage with private industry, and very big names in private industry, to look at the technical possibilities of limiting terrorist use of the internet. That too seems to be extraordinarily difficult, and as soon as you produce one barrier, then entrepreneurial internet users find a million ways around it. So that too would be very resource intensive and not very effective, as you can see in the case of China, for example, in trying to limit all internet traffic into China. Very difficult to do, very expensive, and has commercial consequences. So we have really focused on what Eric was saying, of trying to use the internet more effectively to undermine the message put out by terrorism. So actually to use this marvelous tool for them against them and to deny them that space. And I think that surely is the way forward. And we're planning, if I may say, a conference in early November in Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has been very active in this area, to get a few people together to consider how we might internationalize this.
Excellent. Thank you very much to all the panelists. I'm very glad and actually very relieved that we've managed to get through an hour of discussion about counterterrorism cooperation and the UN without using any acronyms whatsoever. I was involved in a commission 2 years ago with Eric on counterterrorism cooperation. It took me at least 3 days to figure out the different acronyms whilst pretending that I understood them. So thank you very much for this. And it really made obvious the fault lines and what we need to work on in the future. So give everyone a hand of applause, please. And